Welcome back to the Whiteout Report podcast, pregame edition here tonight on Thursday night. I am your host, Marty Leap. My typical host, Dylan, not here with me tonight, going through some family issues. So if you're the thoughts and prayers and good vibes types, make sure you send some his way and keep Dylan and his family in your thoughts right now as they navigate through some challenging times. But Dylan should be back with me Saturday night, though, as we come on to recap Penn State, Nebraska. So Saturday night, 7 o'clock on NBC. Make sure, again, subscribe to the channel, give us your super chats, all that good stuff. Make sure you're here with us as we continue to tread you through this very disappointing Penn State season, but a season that could end with some positivity here. Starting with Saturday night. So last week they finally get off the mat. They take down Michigan State 28-10 in a game that quite honestly was not as close as the score indicated. Penn State, to their credit, came out and really stuck it to Michigan State, which, I mean, Michigan State, they're not a good team, obviously. You probably can make the argument they're, one of the bottom 3 to 5 teams in the Power 4. But Penn State, the last time we saw them this season come off a heartbreaking loss at home to a top 5 team, the season completely collapsed and James Franklin got fired. So to their credit, this time coming off a maybe even more heartbreaking loss at home to a top 5 team against Indiana, they respond by just absolutely pummeling a undermanned and overmatched Michigan State team. And that's what you want to see from Penn State, which sets up Saturday night's battle, the Nittany Lions at 4-6. I personally think if they get to 6-6, there's a low chance they accept the bowl berth for a lot of reasons, but you still, you can take some pride in finishing a year with 3 straight wins, take some pride in not finishing with a losing record. So I'm sure these players are going to be playing for that. And coming to town is Nebraska. Nebraska at 7-3. I think a lot of people who maybe have not watched a lot of Nebraska this year would be surprised by this, but the Nittany Lions are 8.5-point favorites. ESPN's FPI gives them a 70.2% chance of victory. And it is one that, I'll get into my predictions later, but I think this is a game that Penn State's very capable of winning. I'm kind of surprised the line is as big as it is. I'm sure the Dylan Raiola injury is obviously a factor in that, but I do believe that the Nittany Lions are the better team than Nebraska, even as both teams are currently constructed. Penn State, even without Drew Aller, without Tony Rojas, without James Franklin, with everything that's happened this year, I still think they're a better team than Nebraska. I think they would have been a better team than Nebraska if Raiola was playing. I think if Dylan Raiola was playing, the Nittany Lions would still be a favorite on Saturday night. And then you throw in the fact that, it's going to be a night game at Beaver Stadium that's never easy. We saw against Indiana, the Beaver Stadium crowd, to their credit, was electric. It was a really good atmosphere, a really hostile atmosphere that really helped Penn State in a game where they nearly took down the number 2 team in the country, a game where they outplayed Indiana from start to finish and quite honestly should have won. And had it not been for a couple turnovers, and even with the turnovers, some just unbelievable catches by Indiana's receivers on their final drive of the game, the Nittany Lions would have gotten out of there with the victory. So I think the crowd will be a big factor too. And, before we dive into the X's and O's and matchups and all that, you can't talk about it without the Beaver Stadium crowd, as I said. And I think another factor is it's going to be senior day for a lot of guys who, as we've discussed on here throughout the year, unfortunately, their Penn State legacies are going to be a bit tainted by what's happened this year. But you're still talking about some all-time greats. Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, guys who were key cogs on one of the best teams in school history, guys who were key cogs on 3 straight double-digit win seasons, including a Rose Bowl victory, a Peach Bowl berth, and coming one play away from going to the national championship game. Even on the offensive line, this is an offensive line that's really rounded into shape, and you're going to have Nick Dawkins and Nolan Rucci and Drew Shelton playing their final games at Beaver Stadium. Vega Ione most likely playing his final game at Beaver Stadium. He's probably played himself into comfortably being a top 2 round pick in the NFL draft. So there's going to be a lot of guys who I think are going to be very motivated, not just by the Beaver Stadium crowd, not just because it's their final night game at Beaver Stadium, but because it's their final game at Beaver Stadium. Even some of these guys who, looking ahead to next year, you're not sure what your future is going to be. Are they going to be at Penn State? Are they potentially going to join James Franklin at Virginia Tech? Or are they maybe somewhere else? I'm sure even a lot of those guys are going to be motivated in what some of them think could be, what some of them may already know is going to be their final game at Beaver Stadium, to go out in front of the best crowd in college football with a victory. And again, I think this is a good matchup for them. I get Nebraska is 7-3. In a lot of ways, though, I think they're a bit of a paper tiger. If you look at their schedule, the two best teams they've played are Michigan and USC, both of whom beat them. They got smacked around pretty good against a pretty poor Minnesota team. If Preston Stone was not a horrible quarterback, they would have lost to Northwestern. And if not for a head scratching yellow ball in the final minute by Brendan Sorsby, they would have lost to Cincinnati. So this is a team that, yes, they're 7-3. They could very easily have a fourth, if not fifth, loss. And again, this is without their 5-star quarterback in Dylan Raiola as well. And TJ Lateef, to his credit, we'll start there. Penn State's defense against TJ Lateef, the Nebraska offense. To Lateef's credit, he was very good against UCLA, but as we saw when Penn State played UCLA, that's not a great defense. Now again, 13 of 15, 205, 3 scores. That's really good, no matter who you're playing. He also added 31 yards on the ground. But against USC the week prior, and against Different, you get thrown to the Wolves. Don't have time to prep all week as a starter and that sort of thing. I get that. But against the Trojans, which is a much better defense than UCLA, but the statistics may say it's a better defense than Penn State this year, but I still think the Nittany Lion defense has a higher ceiling and has played better in recent weeks. But against USC, he was 5 of 7 for 7 yards. It's pretty hard to go complete 5 passes and have 7 yards passing. That's pretty remarkable. So I think, with Penn State, it's going to be important to pressure Lateef, which the pass rush has been tremendous in recent weeks. The secondary's played really well. Zakee Wheatley, a guy I should have mentioned earlier in terms of guys getting ready for their final game at Beaver Stadium, facing a really challenging situation this year as a senior. Definitely not the way he anticipated his final year on campus going. Has been tremendous all year. Has played really good football for Penn State all year. So I think that's secondary. Darius Dixon, a young freshman, has really emerged in recent weeks. AJ Harris, if he's healthy. Zion Tracy's been good. It's going to be up to this pass rush to pressure Lateef. It's going to be up to the secondary to try and negate some of these Nebraska receivers, because when it comes to Nebraska's offense, it all starts and stops with Emmett Johnson. 203 carries on the year, averaging 5.5 yards a carry, 11 touchdowns, already north of 1,100 yards rushing. The offense revolves around Emmett Johnson. As I said, he has 203 carries. If you take away Johnson, Nebraska has 143 carries other than him. The next leading rusher in terms of carries is Isaiah Mosey with 17. So they are going to feed Emmett Johnson. And if they stop Emmett Johnson, Penn State's going to win the game. If they don't, they're going to have trouble winning the game. It's going to be that simple, in my opinion. And I think if you're Penn State, Emmett Johnson's a tremendous running back, might be the best running back, honestly, that they face all season. You like the matchup because the defensive line the last 2 weeks has been outstanding against Indiana and against Michigan State. The defensive line completely took over against the Spartans. Now, that's a bad Michigan State offensive line, but as I'll get into here in a minute, Nebraska's offensive line is nothing great either. And against Indiana, the defensive line is a big reason why the Nittany Lions nearly pulled off the upset. So to dive a little bit deeper on that, because again, they're going to have to stop Emmett Johnson if they're going to win this game. The defensive line, I think this is a really good matchup for Penn State. Just look at the bodies first and foremost. Dani Dennis Sutton, the last 2 weeks, has looked like Dani Dennis Sutton. Has looked like the player we saw wreck games in the playoff last year. Has looked like the player we saw who, along with Abdul Carter, almost drugged the Nittany Lions to the national championship game last year in the Orange Bowl against Notre Dame. He's coming off a Big Ten defensive performer of the week outing against Michigan State, where he had 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and a pass breakup. If you can get that kind of a performance out of Dani Dennis Sutton this week, you're going to feel really good about where you're at. And then from there, it's not just Dennis Sutton, of course. Zane Durant has really started to kick it into gear, kind of be the guy that you had anticipated him being in recent weeks. Chaz Coleman, if he is back from the injury, flu bug, whatever it is that's been bugging him the last few weeks, seemingly a little bit of each, that's going to go a long way for the Nittany Lion defense. And then just some of the younger guys who have very quietly been putting together strong seasons. Xavier Gilliam, Yvonne Kemajo. I know he's not a younger guy, but Zariah Fisher has continued to at times pop and make some noise. So I think this is a really good matchup for the Nittany Lion defensive line against the Nebraska offensive line that, again, I get that, Emma Johnson's had a strong season, but I don't think this is a very good offensive line. This is an offensive line that has struggled this year against some lesser defenses. Like I said, the Cincinnati defense is not very good and really gave Nebraska's offensive line troubles early in the year. Michigan, we saw their defensive line manhandle them. USC at times, and Lincoln Riley's USC is not known for being a physical team that out physicals their opponents, and that's what they did against Nebraska. At times against Northwestern, really for majority of that game. I remember watching that game. Their offensive line really struggled with the Wildcats. So I do think that this is a great matchup for Penn State offensive line against the Nebraska defensive line, or against the Nebraska offensive line, excuse me. And as we're going to get into here, I think in general, Penn State has a very large advantage in the trenches this weekend. And we'll get into that more on the offensive versus defensive aspects of it when we get into Penn State's offense. But that's a big reason why I think the Nittany Lions are, 8.5-point favorites and are very capable of coming out victorious on Saturday night against Nebraska, is because I think, at its core, football is always a point of attack game. It's a game that's won in the trenches, and I think Penn State has a huge advantage at the line of scrimmage over Nebraska. So, defensively, it's going to start with shutting down Emmett Johnson. If you can shut down Emmett Johnson, or at least contain Emmett Johnson, that's a big first step toward victory. And then if you do that and you try and force TJ Lateef to beat you, and if Lateef comes out and does to you what he did against UCLA, you tip his cap and tell him good game. But I don't think that's going to happen if you can contain Johnson. I think with Johnson too, part of it is you've got to accept that he's probably going to get his yards to some extent. Again, 203 carries on the year. They are feeding him the rock. If you look at his game log, 25 carries against Cincinnati, 19 against Michigan, 21 against Maryland, 27 against Northwestern, 29 against USC, 28 against UCLA. If the game is close, they're going to feed Emmett Johnson. The only times he hasn't absolutely been fed the ball were in non-con blowout wins over Akron and Houston Baptist, a comfortable win against Michigan State, and then when they got blown out against Minnesota, so they had to throw the ball to come from behind. So it's one of those where you've got to accept Johnson's going to get his yards. You might look up at the end of the night and see he has 120, 130 yards rushing, but if he's doing that on 4 yards a carry, you're going to take it. And then that's where it's going to be important for this defense against TJ Lateef to not let him beat you. But I think one thing defensively with Lateef that's going to be important is he can use his legs. He's a good dual threat guy. Don't let what happened against Nico Iamaleava and UCLA happen again Saturday night, where it seemed they took forever to adjust. And now part of it, I think, was that being the first game without Tony Rojas, because he would have been the guy who would have been spying Nico. But if Lateef starts to give you problems with his legs, you've got to adjust. You've got to put a spy. You've got to do something. You can't let that happen again, especially if you are having success against Emmett Johnson in the running game. And then, if you look at Nebraska, you look at the receivers, if you are able to contain Johnson or get a lead on the Cornhuskers to where you're forcing Lateef to throw the ball, it's not that Nebraska doesn't have good receivers, because they've got some good receivers, but, there's nobody there that truly scares you with this Cornhusker passing attack. Nyzeen Hunter is a fine player, but nothing that, you would think the likes of an AJ Harris and Davian Collins, a Zion Trace, whoever it is, can't handle. Same for Ja'Cory Barney. Two guys who are averaging, in Hunter's case, 14.4 yards a carry, Barney averaging about 11 yards of reception. Dane Key, a bit of a red zone touchdown threat for the Cornhuskers with 5 touchdown catches. So it's going to be, again, if you can contain Emmett Johnson, force Lateef then to beat you with his arm, not with his legs, I think you're going to feel good about where you're at defensively. And as I said, I think Penn State a huge advantage in the trenches. I think this could be a big game for Denai Dennis Sutton. I can promise you Denai Dennis Sutton is going to be extremely motivated on Saturday night, because he wouldn't want to leave Beaver Stadium with a loss regardless, but especially the way this season's gone for Penn State, he's going to want nothing more on Saturday night than to come out and put together one more game record, Denai Dennis Sutton type of performance in front of the Penn State fans and end his career on a high note at Beaver Stadium And there'd be no better way to do that than wrecking this game and helping the defense shut down Nebraska's offense on your way to victory. So we will get into the offense of Penn State's against Nebraska's defense. Before we do, once again, thank you for being here tonight at the Whiteout Report podcast here with our friends at Proline TV. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the channel, give us your super chats, your super likes, all that good stuff. Make sure you have your notifications turned on, you subscribe, because when we go live Saturday night after this game to talk about it, you'll know we'll be there at some point. Probably getting to the point, and sooner rather than later, Penn State's going to have a new coach. And, whenever we go live to break down that hire, you're going to want to be here to get our insight on that, to get our perspective on it. So make sure, again, subscribe, like the channel, have your notifications turned on, give us your super chats, all that good stuff. So now, Penn State's offense against Nebraska's defense. Again, this is a matchup that I like for the Nittany Lions because of the line of scrimmage. Penn State's offensive line the past few weeks, even against Iowa, played well. In the loss against Iowa. Played well against Ohio State, and then Andy Koldernicki went away from the run for God knows what reason, and the Buckeyes got a big lead and had to throw the ball. They ran the ball with a lot of success against Indiana, ran it all over Michigan State. This is a matchup I really, really like. I think Nebraska's defensive line is quietly one of the worst in the Big Ten, and I think Penn State's offensive line can push them around. And again, I think this is an offensive line that's going to be motivated. Nick Dawkins is a multi-year captain, redshirt senior, getting ready to play his final game at Beaver Stadium. Same goes for Drew Shelton. Same goes for Nolan Rucci. Seniors getting ready to play their final game at Beaver Stadium. Vega Ione, as I mentioned, probably going to be his final game at Beaver Stadium, because I'm assuming he's going to go pro. There's a lot of offensive linemen who I think are going to be motivated, and the motivation factor is big here. In that aside, I think that this is an offensive line that, again, just has a huge advantage over Nebraska's defensive line. And then you go to the running back position. Katron Allen just, continues to hum along for the Nittany Lions, coming off of another big performance last week against Michigan State, where he ran for 181 yards and 2 scores. I mean, again, you got to tip your cap to Katron Allen this season, in a season where he could have shut it down, opted out, and started to prepare for the NFL draft. He is not. He is averaging 5.6 yards a carry, 12 scores, is going to have he's already got his 4th career season of at least 867 yards, his 3rd career season of 900 plus yards. He's going to get his 2nd straight 1,000 yard season. For comparison's sake, Katron Allen finished last year with 1,108 yards on 220 carries, and that was with Penn State getting, to the national semifinals. This year on 163 carries, he's already at 917 yards. So I think that, that bodes well for Penn State, that Allen has been a motivated runner all year. He needs 138 yards to become the school's all-time leading rusher. 138 yards to pass Evan Royster. He's going to get there because they've got 2 games, and Rutgers' defense is putrid. He's going to get there. I can guarantee you Allen and the coaching staff alike would love for him to get it Saturday night. So I think there's going to be a chance there that you see him really fed the ball on Saturday night in an effort to get him that all-time rushing record in front of the Beaver Stadium crowd in his final game at Beaver Stadium. I think you're going to see an effort there. Again, he's going to get there, needing 138 yards in 2 games. I won't be surprised to see him get it on Saturday night due to all those factors, the motivation factor of it being his final game at Beaver Stadium, the way he's playing right now, and not even just that, the fact that, again, I think Penn State's offensive line matches up extremely well with Nebraska's defensive line, and that could also potentially bring us to Nicholas Singleton. I think this Nebraska defense is vulnerable to explosive plays. And when Nick Singleton is at his best, obviously, is when he's making the explosive plays. We saw that return against Indiana a few weeks ago, where Singleton looked like the Nick Singleton of recent years, the Nick Singleton of last year. Also a Singleton, there could be some mystery there for him. 51 career total touchdowns in a Nittany Lion uniform, 2 shy of Saquon Barkley's record of 53. So I think they're going to be motivated also to get Singleton that record at Beaver Stadium. So, Keen, yeah, if a lot of the long runs Nebraska has given up this year have come on misdirection, bad angles, missed tackles, again, I think that bodes well for Penn State, because There are a few things Katron Allen does better than hitting the line of scrimmage, making a jump cut on a misdirection on an off tackle, and off he goes. And, with Nicholas Singleton, with his explosiveness, with his speed, if you take the wrong angle, if you miss a tackle, that's when you look up and Singleton's gone 50 yards in a blink of an eye. And that's one thing that Singleton has not done as well of a job of this year as he has in past years. But in past years, a lot of times it was one guy misses a tackle, the guy at the second level takes a bad angle, off to the races he goes. So I do think that if that is a struggle for Nebraska with the misdirection, bad angles, and missed tackles, that bodes well for Penn State as well, because the misdirection is what Katron Allen's going to do best. And, with Nicholas Singleton, when you have someone as explosive as him, as I said, you're always one missed tackle away as a defense from disaster. So I do think that again, is something that will work into Penn State's favor. And also, I do think, again, they're going to be motivated as a staff, as players, to try and get Allen that rushing record on Saturday and get Singleton to at least tie Saquon's record on Saturday, because they would love for them to be able to do it at Beaver Stadium in their final game at Beaver Stadium, especially with it being a night game at Beaver Stadium as well. Now, if you're Nebraska's defense and you're able to contain that rushing attack of Katron Allen and of Nicholas Singleton, then obviously that's going to throw a lot on the shoulders of Ethan Grunkenmeyer. And when we came on here talking about Grunkenmeyer's performance after the Indiana game, we all raved because he was tremendous against Indiana. You saw him just continue to improve every single week as the starting quarterback, when he was just thrown to the wolves, right? His first career start on the road, Kinnick Stadium at night against the top 20 Iowa team. Then he goes to the Horseshoe to play number 1 Ohio State. Then he finally gets his first career home start against the number 2 team in the country. Last week against Michigan State, Dylan and I both said, hey, we're kind of excited to see what he does against a defense that's not a world beater. And he struggled. You saw some misreads sometimes where he had guys open, held on the ball too long, was just 8 of 13 for 127 and 2 scores, including a 75-yard touchdown pass to Devontae Ross. But part of it was, too, the way they were running the ball. They didn't need him to do more. So I think, that was a smart move on the coaching staff's part. Smart job by Grunkenmeyer to take care of the ball, because turnovers had been an issue. He didn't turn it over at all last week. So I'll be curious to see what Grunkenmeyer does Saturday night. What do these receivers do who have been so maligned all year? And, rightfully so. Do we see any of them step up and potentially look to finish this thing out strong at Beaver Stadium? Can they take advantage of the Nebraska secondary? I think if you're Penn State and you find yourself in a position where you have to throw the ball Saturday night, you're in trouble, because you expect to be able to run the ball against Nebraska, especially considering, you ran down the throat to Michigan State last week. The week before against Indiana, you ran the ball with success. You've had success running the ball against better defenses than Nebraska's this year. But if you do have to throw the ball, that's where it's going to be, Trevor Pena, who, has been better in recent weeks, but still, him and Devontae Ross, probably not what you would anticipate coming out of the transfer portal, especially after both got off the strong starts. But in the passing game, I'm still going to be intrigued to see Kobe Howard. The true freshman receiver has just 4 catches on the year, but is averaging 17 yards a catch. Did not get his first catch until the Iowa game. Has been a bigger part of the offense snap count-wise in recent weeks, even if the production hasn't been huge yet. But I will be curious to see what he does. Tyser Denmark, another young receiver who, again, snap count-wise, the production is, or the involvement's been up, even the production hasn't. And these Penn State tight ends, to go back to the comment from Keenan a minute ago, if these Nebraska linebackers are struggling, that's where you can look to exploit the middle of the field with your tight ends, right? With the Khalil Dinkins, the Luke Reynolds, who, has had a bit of a sophomore slump, would love to finish year strong, Andrew Rapplier. So I'll be curious to see that. But again, I think if you're Penn State and you feel like you're going to come out of this game with victory, it's going to be because you're running the ball with success with Katron Allen, with Nicholas Singleton. And that's something I expect them to be able to do. I mean, Nebraska comes into this game ranked 90th nationally in rush defense. As a unit, they're allowing nearly 5 yards per carry this year. I think if you're Penn State, you've got to be able to come out, win this thing in the trenches on Saturday night, especially at home. Again, it's going to be a raucous environment, and run the ball with success and get out of there with a victory. So before we go into some coaching talk to wrap this thing up here, I'll give my predictions. I kind of spoiled the defensive field earlier when I mentioned Denai Dennis Sutton. I think like this can be a big game for him. I'll take him as my defensive MVP. I think he puts together a star showing in his final time at Beaver Stadium. Katron Allen, I'll take him offensively as well. again, I think they're going to be motivated to get him 138 yards, get him to break Evan Royster's record at home. He'll break it regardless, unless he gets injured, because they're going to be able to run against Rutgers. But I think they want him to break it at home. I'll take him as my offensive MVP, and I think Penn State wins the game. I think they're a better team than Nebraska. I'm still not totally comfortable picking them to win a game, but I think they're a better team than Nebraska. I think last week's win was big for them to get up off the mat. Really showed how much the guys who are still there really do respect and have rallied around Terry Smith. So I think the Nittany Lions will get a win, finish their home season with a victory under the lights at Beaver Stadium, and what's going to be a Beaver Stadium swan song for a lot of guys, not just the seniors, a lot of guys on this roster, a lot of guys on these coaching staff who's been here a lot of years, including some alumni who are on this staff, some former Lettermen. It's going to be probably an emotional scene at Beaver Stadium Saturday night, one way or the other, but I think the Nittany Lions will get a victory. I'll say they get out of it with a 27-21 victory over the Cornhuskers. And then it's, turn your attention to Nebraska for the season finale to see if you can finish with a non-losing record. And then it's all about the coaching search at that point. And to wrap it up here, we will talk a little bit on the coaching search. Dylan and I Sunday, when we got into a little bit, of course, the big change had been Mike Elko signing the extension with Texas A&M. I think people in Penn State circles knew it, and it had even been kind of leaked. Again, we talked about Ralph Russo had mentioned it, Pete Thamel had mentioned it, that I think Elko was the number one target by Pat Kraft, and I think there was a lot of discussion there. I think Mike Elko never really told them no. I think he was very interested in it, but in the end got paid by Texas A&M. So now, you look into this week, there's been a lot of smoke that Bob Chesney, the head coach of James Madison, is gaining some steam, has potentially interviewed in person. Personally, I get what people are going to say about Curt Cignetti, the jump he made, that sort of thing. I think this is much different for a lot of reasons. The biggest being Cignetti had plenty of experience coaching at the Power 4 level, including with Nick Saban. Bob Chesney has never coached above the Sun Belt in any fashion, let alone as a head coach. There's been some buzz. This was early in the search and it kind of died down, but the last few days kind of picked back up. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I still don't believe it will. But I think Kalen DeBoer is a name that can't be ignored. There's enough smoke and enough buzz from enough places that, again, similar to Elko, Penn State has undoubtedly reached out to DeBoer, and DeBoer has not told them no. So that doesn't mean he's going to leave Alabama for Penn State. I still don't think he'll leave Alabama for Penn State, but I do think that's just going to be something to monitor, And then in addition to those guys, I've said for a few weeks now, I still, gun to my head, had to pick a choice. I'd say Eli Drinkwitz. I'd seen some buzz today that he's not super high on the board for Florida, which if that's the case, I think just increases the odds of him being at Penn State. Brent Key's a name to continue to watch. But how these coaching searches go, a lot of times wind up being someone that none of us have talked about. But no, I do think we'll have a resolution too soon, because we're into November 20th now. You'd love to have a coach in place before the December 3rd signing period. But the big thing is going to be when the transfer portal opens. This is January 2nd, especially there being only one portal window now. As we mentioned, that's going to be the big one. I think Penn State gets a coach in place probably by the second week of December at the latest, unless they're truly waiting out someone who's in the playoff. But I would guess that within the next 20 or so days, maybe even less, we know who the coach is going to be. Again, gun to my head right now, I'd say Drinkwitz, but that's not a given by any means. But we'll see what happens. Whatever happens in the coaching carousel with Penn State, we will continue to have you covered. We'll continue to have you covered with our pre- and post-game shows as well. So as we get ready to wrap it up here, thank you for joining me tonight, everyone. We will be back on Saturday night to break down whatever happens at Beaver Stadium between the Nittany Lions and the Cornhuskers. Should be an exciting game. Should be an emotional game. As like I said, it's going to be the Beaver Stadium swan song for a lot of people in this program, between players and coaches. People have been here for a long time. People have been parts of some of the most memorable victories and some of the best teams in program history. So hopefully they can send it out with a victory, and hopefully, Penn State fans can enjoy it and send them out the right way as well.